Imagine a world where desperation can carve a path as harsh as the winter wind, where survival demands a price no heart should pay. In the frost-bitten heart of Snow Ridge, Wyoming Territory, November 1884, the mountains unleashed their fury, howling with icy talons that ripped through the silent town. A thick shroud of snow smothered every sound save for the mournful groan of shutters and the faint sizzle of lanterns flickering behind frozen panes. Beneath the sagging awning of a forsaken store, Eliza Monroe stood trembling, her boots sodden, her skirts hardened by frost's cruel grip. Since the pale light of dawn she had wandered, a ghost with nowhere to call home, nothing left to barter. That morning, the boarding house had cast her out with a sneer. "Your reputation's a stain," the matron had hissed. Her hands, raw and split, clung to a threadbare shawl, as useless as a whisper against the cold. Hunger gnawed at her insides, a relentless beast, while her cracked lips bled with every shuddering breath. Across the snow-choked street, the saloon exhaled a taunting aroma of stew-rich beef, sharp onion, a warmth she could almost taste. Her vision blurred with tears, her legs quivered beneath her. Then a shadow loomed. Footsteps crunched behind her. "Well now," a voice slurred, thick with liquor, "what treasure stands shivering here?" She turned to face a stranger, his coat tattered yet lined, his breath a rancid cloud of whiskey. "A delicate thing like you shouldn't brave this chill," he leered. "I'm only seeking warmth," she whispered, voice frail. His grin widened. "I've got a fire, a bed." "I share. For a price." She recoiled. "Please, no." His smirk faded, grip tightening on her wrist. "You've no choice, darling. Food, shelter, name your cost." She fought, gasping. "I said no." Her protest trembled in the air. "Don't play the saint," he sneered. Then a voice sliced through the blizzard, steady as stone. "I believe the lady refused." They turned. A figure emerged, tall and imposing, snow dusting his hat and coat, a jagged scar tracing his stern face. As the tension lingered from that raw encounter, it was the stranger's piercing gaze, unyielding, icy, that halted the drunk in his tracks. "This ain't your concern," the man slurred, defiance wavering in his voice. "It is now," came the firm reply. "You don't know her story." "I know she's shivering. I know she refused you. And I know you ignored her plea." The drunk's bravado crumbled like brittle ash. "She's not worth the trouble," he grumbled, releasing his grip and staggering away, his curses fading into the frigid night. Eliza remained pinned against the wall, her pulse a frantic drum in her chest. The stranger held his ground, unmoving. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. She managed a faint nod, though uncertainty trembled in her voice. I'm not sure." His eyes narrowed with concern. "When did you last eat something warm?" She averted her gaze, shame shadowing her features. Without a word, he shrugged off his weathered coat and gently placed it over her shoulders. The scent of pine, worn leather, and a comforting warmth enveloped her, a shield against the biting cold. "Wait," she murmured, barely audible. "No one should be left to shiver and starve in this forsaken place," he said, his tone resolute. Extending a gloved hand, he introduced himself. "Calder Briggs. I've got a ranch just beyond town. It's simple, nothing grand, but it's shelter. If you're willing to work, cooking, cleaning, I'll provide a room, meals, and fair pay. Honest terms." Eliza studied his face, searching for any trace of deceit or malice. She found none. "Eliza Monroe," she replied, voice steadier now. "And yes." With a quiet nod, Calder drew a pair of thick wool gloves from his coat pocket and pressed them into her quivering hands. No grand gestures, no hollow promises, just a silent act of kindness. Then turning, he strode toward a waiting wagon at the street's edge. Eliza glanced at the gloves, their warmth a quiet promise. Without hesitation, she followed. As the wagon rolled out of town, the snow thickened, its weight muffling the world. Wheels groaned under layers of ice and stillness. Eliza sat rigid beside Calder, his coat still a heavy comfort around her. Beyond the wagon, the landscape dissolved into an endless blur of white, pine trees sagging beneath their snowy burdens, whispering secrets of the wild. What lay ahead in this frozen expanse? Could trust, so fragile, survive the cold? As I noticed your message cuts off at the end, but I'll rewrite the provided text as requested, crafting an engaging and emotional narrative with vivid imagery and varied sentence structures. Here is the rewritten content, approximately 309 words, with a formal yet passionate tone, ensuring a smooth transition and heightened engagement through expressive exclamations and thought-provoking questions. As the ghostly outlines of mountains faded into the twilight, a heavy silence hung between them during the journey. Only the rhythmic huffing of the horses and the faint groan of leather harnesses broke the stillness of the evening. At long last, her voice, rough and weary, pierced the quiet. "How much farther?" she rasped. 10 miles, Calder answered curtly. "Maybe less if the road doesn't betray us." Their path wound ever upward into the rugged hills, the sky deepening to a somber indigo. Calder ignited the lantern at the wagon's front, its tender golden light a fragile shield against the swirling snowflakes. Eliza's gaze clung to the distant horizon, yet her mind churned with restless doubts. Who was this enigmatic stranger beside her? Why extend such unprompted refuge, free of demands or conditions? In her world, kindness was a currency, always tallied in some unseen ledger. Yet Calder hadn't pried with invasive stares, hadn't lingered with unwanted touch. He hadn't even sought the tale of her scars. How could such quiet generosity unsettle her so deeply? Through the skeletal branches, a humble homestead emerged, a weathered wooden fence, a barn leaning under time's weight, and a 2-story house with faint smoke whispering from its chimney. Calder halted the wagon by the front steps, dismounted with a creak of boots, and turned to offer his hand. Hesitation gripped her, but she accepted, stepping down into the unknown. Inside, the house breathed with a stillness that felt almost sacred. Worn boots lined the entryway, coats hung like silent sentinels. The floor sighed beneath their weight, and the hearth's warmth enveloped her, a sudden aching relief she hadn't known she craved. Calder nodded toward the stairs. "Up there, second door on the right." Eliza ascended, each step a mournful creak. Until she reached the threshold, she pushed the door open and froze. The room was unadorned, yet profoundly hers. A modest bed rested beneath a window framing the stoic mountains, draped in a faded patchwork quilt. At its foot, a wooden chest stood guard, while a small stove cast a flickering glow. Could this simplicity truly be a sanctuary? In the quiet corner of the room, a lamp glowed softly, casting a warm halo of light. On the windowsill, a cherished collection of books stood in a neat line, their spines weathered and pale from countless readings, yet holding strong with unspoken stories. Eliza drifted toward the bed, her fingers brushing over the blanket, its fabric pristine and tender to the touch. A faint whiff of cedar lingered in the air, stirring something deep within her. Suddenly, a sharp ache gripped her throat, burning and relentless. She turned away, pressing a hand to her lips, but the tears slipped through, silent, searing, an unstoppable tide of emotion. Downstairs, Calder waited patiently, his presence a quiet anchor without a word of intrusion. When Eliza finally made her way down, her eyes still rimmed with red, but her expression steadied. She found him in the kitchen. He stood by the counter, pouring steaming water into a weathered tin kettle, the sound a gentle murmur in the stillness. "There's bread," he said softly, "and some stew from last night." Nothing grand, but it's warm. Eliza settled at the table, the old chair groaning under her weight. She hid her trembling hands beneath her arms, embarrassed by their unsteady dance. Calder placed a bowl before her, steam rising in delicate spirals, carrying the hearty, grounding scent of meat and slow-simmered comfort. "Thank you," she murmured, barely audible. He poured tea into a chipped mug, placing it beside her before taking a seat across the table, his silence a steady companion. As she lifted the spoon to her lips, he noticed her hands raw from the cold, chapped and broken. Feeling exposed, she tucked them into her sleeves. "Don't," Calder said, his voice a quiet rumble. Her eyes met his. He reached into a drawer, retrieving a small tin and setting it between them. "Salve," he explained. Her fingers hesitated, uncertain. "Hands like those," he continued. "They've still got so much to offer, to mend, to create something better." Her breath caught. "I was a teacher once," she confessed, the words spilling out. "I believe that." He replied with simple conviction. She nodded, unsure why his faith in her stirred something so profound. The evening unfolded in near silence, marked only by the steady tick of a wall clock and the faint clink of spoons against bowls. As the evening drew to a close, Eliza rose from the table, the clink of cutlery fading into silence. Calder offered a single solemn nod. "Good night, Miss Monroe," he murmured. Her response came as a whisper, tender and unguarded. "Eliza." Their eyes locked for a fleeting moment, a silent understanding passing between them. Then with a gentle turn, she ascended the creaking stairs, the door to her room shutting with a soft click, a sound not of exclusion, but of sanctuary. For the first time in endless months, it felt as though she was sealing peace within those four walls, rather than barring the world's chaos. The days that followed wove themselves into a quiet, almost alien cadence. Eliza greeted each dawn before the sun dared to rise, draping herself in Calder's weathered coat, her bare feet padding across the icy wooden floor. In the dim kitchen, she wrestled with the stubborn iron stove, her chilled fingers fumbling to feed it logs, coaxing the flue until smoke finally curled upward as it should. Her first attempt at porridge bubbled over in a messy rebellion. The second emerged half raw at its heart. Then, a plate slipped from her grasp while drying, exploding into a shower of jagged porcelain across the floor. A gasp escaped her lips as she dropped to her knees, gathering the fragments. "I'm so sorry," she breathed, voice trembling. "I'll make it right." Calder knelt beside her, lifting a delicate shard of white china. "Plates break," he said simply. "As long as people don't, we're still winning." Her gaze searched his face. Was this mockery? No, only sincerity lingered there. Outside, under a biting sky, she scattered grain for the chickens, raked their straw, and hauled water, striving not to drench herself. The hens squawked indignantly, pecking at her boots, while the cold nipped at her flushed cheeks. Yet she pressed on. Another stew charred to ruin, and though she braced for reproach, Calder only ate in silence. When her apologies tumbled out, he replied, "A cold stove's a harder teacher than any book ever was." And when soot clogged the stovepipe, threatening to choke the kitchen with smoke, he scaled the roof amid biting wind and swirling snow, resolute and wordless, as she watched in quiet awe. How could such quiet strength coexist with such unspoken burdens? As the narrative weaves onward from the silent toil of the day, the image of him lingers perched on the roof's western edge, a solitary figure carved against the somber, iron-hued sky, driving shingles into place with unwavering focus. No coat shielded him from the biting wind, no gloves softened the chill, just the steady rhythm of his hands at work. Later, when she slipped back into the sanctuary of her room, a quiet gift awaited at the foot of her bed, a thick, wool-lined coat, pieced together from remnants of the past. Her fingers traced the collar with a tender awe, as if touching a memory. No note accompanied it. No words were spoken to claim the gesture. By morning, a pair of sturdy hand-knit socks rested beside her weathered boots, their warmth a silent promise. Between them, no discussion ever broached these small acts of care. None at all. The days stretched on, frigid and still, yet within her a dormant warmth began to stir, as if life itself was coaxing her heart to beat anew. Then came a night when a ferocious storm roared down from the hills, battering the house with savage gusts that shook the very beams. Inside, the stove's fire sputtered weakly, barely holding its own. Eliza huddled beneath her quilt, eyes wide in the oppressive dark, sleep an elusive stranger. When it finally claimed her, it pulled her into the depths of old wounds, Royce's grip on her wrist, the sting of shame, her father's gaze choosing doubt over trust. She jolted awake, chest constricting, breaths ragged and shallow, sweat clinging to her skin. Moonlight spilled through the window, painting ghostly streaks across the floor. Trembling, she rose, only to freeze at a faint movement near her door. Barefoot, she crept closer. There, on the threshold, rested a solitary mug, steam rising in delicate wisps, carrying the sweet, nostalgic scent of warm milk kissed with cinnamon. She peered into the empty hallway. Nothing, no sound, just a haunting quiet. Her eyes returned to the mug, to the tender curl of steam, and a tear welled up, not born of sorrow, but of something softer, something long forgotten. Could such small kindnesses truly pierce the armor of years? In the wake of that tender, unspoken gesture, a quiet kindness lingered, not born of fear, but of a gentle, aching solace. She lifted the warm mug, cradling its heat in her trembling hands, and carried it indoors. As she sipped, the tempest outside howled with unrelenting fury. Yet within those walls, a shift had occurred. Solitude had fled. She was no longer alone. It started with a name, a mere whisper overheard at the general store. Eliza had ventured into town alongside Calder to gather essentials: flour, salt, kerosene. While he haggled at the counter, she lingered near the dusty shelves, unnoticed. That's when the words drifted to her, a snippet of talk between two weathered men huddled by the stove. "Came from Kansas, I reckon." Blackwell, was it? Tall man searching for someone. The name hit her like a slap of icy water, sharp and jarring. Her grip on the flour sack tightened, her breath caught in a vice of dread. Royce. Could it be? She stumbled outside into the biting wind, her heart thundering in her chest. She yearned to dismiss it as mere chance. A different Blackwell, a wandering soul. Yet, deep in her bones, certainty gnawed at her. That night, food turned to ash in her mouth. She could barely swallow. Calder saw her distress but held his silence, as he often did. Dawn broke with a chilling visitor, Sheriff Langley, riding up through the snow, his steed dusted white. "Morning, Briggs," he greeted, tipping his hat with a nod. A stranger passed through, asking after a young lady named Eliza Monroe. "Description fits your companion here. Said she fled from home, needed back east for family business. Looked formal, but something about him felt wrong." Name's Royce Blackwell. Eliza, pale as the winter frost, stood frozen in the doorway. Langley's gaze softened as it met hers. "I kept quiet. Told him he'd need proper papers if he meant to track her down. Last I saw, he headed toward the foothills." What shadow from her past dared to hunt her now? As the sheriff's figure dwindled into the distance, a heavy stillness settled between Calder and Eliza, a silence so thick it seemed to stretch into eternity. Neither dared to break it at first, standing as if rooted to the earth. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, Eliza murmured, "I have something I must confess." Calder gave a single solemn nod. "Let's go inside," he replied, his tone gentle yet firm. They settled at the worn wooden table, Eliza's hands clenched tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the grain of the wood, avoiding his piercing eyes. "Back in Kansas," she started, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "I served the Blackwell family, wealthy, untouchable. Royce, their eldest son, was my charge. I was merely a tutor, teaching reading, Latin, and numbers." Her throat tightened as she forced the words out. "He began to shower me with gifts. A brooch, fine gloves. I refused them, made it clear I felt nothing for him. But one night, in the dimly lit library, he trapped me. I fought him off, told his mother everything. She wouldn't listen. Her fingers twisted the fabric of her skirt, betraying her anguish. 2 days later, I was branded a thief. Missing jewelry, forged letters, all pinned on me. His word crushed mine. Even my father believed him." She choked, her voice fracturing under the weight of betrayal. "He called me a disgrace, ordered me to vanish before my shame tainted my sister's future." Lifting her tear-filled eyes to Calder, she held her composure by a thread. "I fled with nothing, no home, no allies, just a tarnished name." Calder stood in silence, then moved to the window, where snowflakes danced lazily beyond the pane. "When I first saw you in that alley," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "you were trembling, starved, terrified. Yet when that brute seized your wrist, you still defied him." When he turned, his gaze locking with hers, "I have seen you brave storms to gather eggs. I've witnessed your strength. How could I not?" As the echoes of the previous moment lingered, life pressed on with its relentless demands. You burn your hands on the searing stove, yet you persist, stirring the pot with unwavering resolve. Before the first light kisses the horizon, you're already awake, mending what shatters in your grasp, never once pleading for sympathy. Eliza stood there, breathless, her chest tight, as if the air itself refused her. "I don't give a damn about the whispers from Kansas," he declared, his tone resolute, piercing through her haze. "I see you, truly. I see you when you kneel in the piercing chill to tend the hens, your hands trembling but steadfast." His words hung heavy, and Eliza's lips quivered before the tears broke free. Not the sharp, angry ones of yesterday's, but soft, deep, brimming with unspoken weight. She hid her face in her hands, her shoulders quaking with silent sobs. "I'm sorry," she murmured, barely audible. "I don't mean to." Calder's voice cut through, low and raw with emotion. "You owe me no explanations. Not ever." For the first time, Eliza's tears flowed not from fear, but from the staggering relief of being believed without question. How rare, how shattering, to be seen so plainly. By late morning, the wind turned fierce, biting and unyielding. It tore through the skeletal branches of the cottonwoods and wailed through the barn's weathered cracks, a harbinger of unrest. Eliza lingered on the porch, pail in hand, her gaze tracing the distant ridge. Something felt off. Could the air itself carry a warning? Then came the rhythmic thud of hooves, heralding a lone rider on the trail. Royce Blackwell approached, his posture commanding, his fine coat a stark contrast to the rugged frontier. He rode as if the earth bowed to him. Halting at the yard's fence, he remained mounted, reins slack in one hand, a folded paper clutched in the other. Calder emerged from the barn, wiping grime from his hands with a rag, his stride deliberate as he positioned himself between Royce and the house. Eliza stood rooted to the porch, a statue of unease. "Afternoon, sir," Royce greeted, his voice polished, almost too smooth. "I hear you've made quite the home here, Eliza. How very quaint." As following the tense echoes of the past that lingered in the air, the confrontation at the gate grew heavier, a storm brewing in the frosty silence. Calder stood like a sentinel, his broad frame an unyielding barrier against the world beyond. His shoulders were set with a quiet defiance, guarding the fragile sanctuary he'd built. Royce, undeterred, waved a document with a flourish, his voice dripping with authority. "I hold the law in my hands, signed by a magistrate in Dodge. She belongs with her family, under their custody." Calder remained a statue, unmoved by the threat of paper or power. "She's not leaving this land," he declared, his tone a low rumble of resolve. Royce let out a scornful chuckle, his eyes glinting with disdain. "You don't make the rules here, rancher." But Calder's gaze was iron. "I do on my soil, behind my fence, at my gate." Royce's face tightened, his patience fraying. "She's not the innocent you've painted in your mind. She's a deceiver, a thief, a stain on her family's honor, and now on yours." Calder's response was steady, unshaken. "I know her truth. And if we're to speak of honor, shall we revisit Kansas, the library incident, the theft that never happened?" Royce's smirk faltered, his voice turning to ice. "Watch your words, rancher." Calder advanced a step, the snow crunching under his boots like a warning. "If you intend to cross this threshold, you'll have to cross me first." In a flash, Royce swept back his coat, drawing a revolver and aiming it squarely at Calder's heart. Eliza's breath caught, a pale object slipping from her trembling fingers to shatter on the porch steps. Yet Calder stood fearless, his eyes locked on the barrel. "Is that weapon to reclaim someone, or to bury your shame?" he asked, his voice piercing the frozen air. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. Royce's grip quivered, just enough to betray his doubt. "Don't pretend to be some saint," he snarled. "You know nothing." Calder's reply cut deeper. "I know she refused you, and I know that's a wound you can't bear." Following the tense departure of Royce, the air still hung heavy with unspoken threats as Calder remained rooted to the spot, a silent sentinel, until the intruder's form dissolved into the shadowed woods. Only then did he pivot, his gaze lifting to the house where Eliza stood framed in the doorway, her hand clutching the worn wood as if anchoring herself to reality. Their eyes locked across the frostbitten yard, a wordless exchange passing between them. With a single deliberate nod, Calder seemed to whisper through the distance, "You're safe for this moment." The snow, once a relentless shroud, was beginning to yield, melting into sodden patches along the house's edges. Icicles, which had dangled like menacing daggers, now wept under the timid warmth of dawn, their slow drips a quiet herald of change. Spring lingered just beyond the horizon, not yet bold enough to claim the land, but teasing with whispers of renewal. Within the walls of the house, a different kind of thaw stirred. Eliza, in the heart of the kitchen, caught herself humming, a melody so light it seemed to dance with the morning mist. The sound startled her at first, a forgotten echo of joy, yet she let it flow, stirring the pot as the aroma of cinnamon and hearty oats wove through the air. This kitchen had become her sanctuary, not by decree, but by the quiet rhythm she'd carved into its corners. She reshaped it with care, aligning jars on shelves, folding linens with precision, draping a vibrant blue cloth over the table, and hanging wild sage to dry by the window. Calder, ever silent on the transformation, lingered more often now, perched by the stove with a book or honing tools, his presence a quiet acknowledgement as he watched her tend to this space with the steadfast grace of a guardian of light. Then, one crisp morning, a gift appeared on her bed, an old leather-bound notebook, un told, its pages untouched, a fountain pen nestled within, an invitation to write her own story. What secrets might these blank sheets hold? What dreams could spill from that pen? As the days wove into a tender rhythm, she found solace in the little book tucked neatly within her belongings. She knew, without a doubt, it was his gift to her. That night, under the flickering glow of a single lamp, she opened its crisp pages and lingered over the first blank sheet, her heart a quiet storm. Her hand quivered as she inscribed the date, each stroke deliberate. Then, with a breath held tight, she began anew, not with poetry or polished words, but with raw fragments of her soul, a fragile trail leading back to who she once was. She poured out memories of biting cold, the clucking hens, the sharp scent of pine mingling with Calder's worn coat. She wrote of Kansas, of that harrowing night when surrender seemed inevitable, and of the small miracle of warm milk left at her door. Though she never penned the word love, it shimmered beneath the surface, woven into the delicate loops of her ink. Calder's laughter, once a rare visitor, began to echo more often. It wasn't boisterous or frequent, but oh, how it warmed her. When she tossed a wry quip while kneading dough, or in a fit of frustration scorched the stew and flung the spoon with theatrical flair, his low, genuine chuckle would ripple through the air, coaxing a smile to her lips before she even knew it had bloomed. Then came a day pierced by the sharp rhythm of hammering. Stepping outside, she found him near the barn, sawing timber with focused intent. "What are you crafting?" she called, squinting against the sun's glare. He glanced up, a cryptic shrug his only reply. "You'll see." For days he toiled each afternoon, silent and steadfast, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. He guarded his secret fiercely. Until one twilight, he summoned her from the porch. Leading her to the house's side, he revealed a newly carved doorway, an extension fused to the kitchen wall. With a quiet gesture, he swung the door open. Inside, a modest room awaited, its westward windows drinking in the sunset's golden fire. Light spilled across the bare wooden floor, illuminating a bookshelf already half laden with volumes. Beside it, a small desk and chair stood ready, inviting her dreams to take root. Following the tender revelation of the previous moment, she stood in the quaint reading room, boom, a sanctuary of solace with a weathered yet inviting armchair nestled by the window. As she crossed the threshold, a wave of emotion crashed over her. "I called her," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread in the stillness. "What is this place?" She wondered aloud, her eyes wide with awe. He lounged against the doorframe, arms folded, a quiet strength in his stance. "A reading room," he replied with understated pride, "crafted for someone who cherishes the weight of words." She pivoted to face him, searching his expression. At first, he averted his gaze, but then their eyes locked, a piercing, unguarded connection that spoke volumes without a single utterance. In that silent exchange, she glimpsed the depths of his unspoken thoughts, raw and profound. Stepping closer, her fingers grazed the desk's edge, a tangible link to his thoughtfulness. "It's breathtaking," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. He offered a single nod, murmuring, "Felt like the house was incomplete without it." For a heartbeat, the silence between them roared louder than any declaration of devotion. Words were unnecessary. In that sunlit haven of books and warmth, constructed with care by a man who truly saw her, she felt the truth. Love lingered in every corner, unnamed yet undeniable. Just past midday, a different tempest brewed not of nature, but of human conflict. Royce Blackwell returned, his presence a dark cloud on the horizon. This time, he wasn't alone. Two imposing men rode beside him, Tim, their stern faces and rigid bearing exuding menace. They halted at the property's edge as Calder emerged from the barn, wiping grime from his hands onto a rag already darkened with toil. Royce dismounted, his boots grinding into the softening earth. "I warned you," he declared, his tone devoid of warmth. Calder remained silent, unflinching. From his coat, Royce produced a folded document, its edges worn with intent. Official, now testimonies, an affidavit. She forged letters, siphoned money, and there are names to back it up. Eliza appeared on the porch, her posture resolute, her eyes unwavering. "None of it is true," she stated, her voice steady yet laced with a tremor of defiance. Royce's gaze shifted to her, piercing and cold. Then, "Come." As the tension lingered from the previous confrontation, the air grew heavy with unspoken resolve. Calder's voice cut through the stillness, fierce and unyielding. "No one's dragging her anywhere," he declared, his tone a fortress of defiance. He refused to meet Eliza's gaze, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if anchoring himself against a storm of memory. She reached for his arm, a silent plea, but he shook his head, burdened by a past he could not escape. I've stayed quiet before, watched someone I loved be torn away, trusting that justice would prevail. I was wrong then. Now he turned to her, his gaze piercing, raw with determination. I won't be wrong again. Facing Royce, his resolve hardened like steel. You want to wield the law as a weapon? Then we'll play by those rules, but fairly. Royce's smirk was a venomous taunt. And how will you manage that? He sneered. Calder's stare never faltered, a quiet fire burning within. By making her my wife. The words landed like thunder, silencing the room. Eliza's breath hitched, her heart a captive bird in her chest. Royce's scoff shattered the quiet. You think a ring erases her crimes? No, Calder countered, voice steady as bedrock. But it grants her a voice as a citizen of this town. It shields her from being hauled off like cattle, placing her under the safeguard of my name, my home, and this land. Turning to Eliza, his expression softened, yet held a gravity that rooted her to the spot. I won't force this on you, but if you agree, we wed today, before the town, before God. Then I stand with you against this falsehood. Her eyes searched his, tracing the scar on his face, the unyielding strength, the man who had crafted a sanctuary for her words. I never sought rescue, she murmured, tears brimming. I only wanted to be believed. His response was a vow. I'm not rescuing you. I'm standing with a survivor. Her lips quivered, emotion spilling over. Yes, she breathed. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden shadows, the townsfolk converged in the square, drawn by whispers and wonder. The blacksmith's wife clutched flowers from her frost-bitten garden, a fragile offering amidst the gathering storm. What would this union mean in the face of such looming darkness? As the echoes of the previous day's tensions lingered, a new chapter unfolded beneath the weathered windowsill of the old church. Sheriff Langley arrived, his heavy coat draped over his shoulders like a mantle of authority. The pastor, brushing dust from his worn book, coughed in astonishment at the sight before him. There stood Eliza, under the church's modest awning, clad in a simple blue dress she had painstakingly stitched with her own hands, a quiet testament to her resilience. Beside her, Calder donned the same patched yet pristine coat from the day their paths first crossed, a symbol of enduring constancy. Call her rigid, perhaps, but Eliza's posture held a quiet strength. When the pastor's voice rang out, asking if Calder would take her hand in marriage, his response was a mere whisper of two words, heavy with conviction. I do. Turning to the small gathering, not just townsfolk, but Royce too, standing with arms folded and a sneer curling his lips, Calder's voice cut through the silence with raw honesty. I didn't wed Eliza Monroe to shield her from the world's cruelty. I married her because I saw her rise from the ashes of despair, crafting a life from bare nothing. Each frigid dawn she breathed warmth into this house, making it a sanctuary. When the world branded her broken, she stood taller still, his gaze locked with hers, intense and unwavering. I didn't save her. I bore witness to her unyielding spirit, and I chose to stand by a woman who refuses to surrender. Tears, rare and unguarded, traced paths down Eliza's cheeks, while a hush fell over all. Even Royce, lips pressed into a thin line, turned and slipped away, not in victory, but in defeated quiet. Time pressed forward. Snow dissolved into the eager earth, and wildflowers erupted in vibrant defiance through the soil. Children darted past fences with carefree laughter, while hens chattered noisily under the tender spring sun. Renewal had arrived, and with it, a long-awaited reckoning. Just 2 weeks after the vows, Royce Blackwell was seized, not for the baseless slander he'd hurled at Eliza, but for the web of deceit he'd spun elsewhere. Fraud, forgery, coercion. When the town relayed word to Kansas authorities, the truth many had whispered was confirmed. Royce had fled his own shadows for too long. At last, justice had closed its grip. Calder, ever steadfast, watched it all unfold with a quiet resolve. Following the weight of unspoken words from the past, a telegram arrived carrying news that Calder read in silence. With a steady hand, he folded the paper, its edges crisp, and placed it gently into a drawer alongside the weathered deeds to his land. Eliza, ever perceptive, never sought to uncover its contents. Why revisit a chapter already closed? Some sorrows are better left undisturbed. Instead, they turn their energy to creation, to forging something new from the ashes of yesterday. Beyond the house, where the freshly repaired fence stood as a quiet triumph, and near the apple tree just beginning to blossom with promise, Calder embarked on a mysterious project. He kept his purpose veiled, yet Eliza sensed it in her bones. With tender determination, she hauled timber by his side, selected paint in hues of warm cream and serene blue, and envisioned windows tall, expansive, gazing toward the western hill where the breeze whispered its gentlest secrets. When the structure was complete, Calder pressed a key into her palm. "For the writer," he murmured, his voice a soft vow. Stepping inside, Eliza's breath caught. A desk stood poised before the hill, as if inviting her thoughts to roam free. A shelf awaited her journals, eager for their weight. And in the corner, a rocking chair nestled beside a modest stove, promising warmth on cold mornings. Her fingers brushed the wall, trembling. "You crafted this for me," she whispered, awe lacing her words. Calder's nod was subtle, profound. "For the words you're yet to write," he replied. As he turned to go, her voice halted him. "Stay," she pleaded. "Just a moment." And he did. Soon after, Eliza's vision expanded beyond that sacred room. She opened the prairie's first free schoolhouse, a humble one-room haven gifted by the church, its benches shaped by Calder's calloused hands. Children arrived from scattered homesteads, their slates in hand, eyes wide with wonder, boots caked in earth. Some had never gripped a pencil, others had never heard their names held value on a page. With boundless patience, Eliza taught them letters, numbers, and the art of hearing meaning beneath life's clamor. She wove stories' true tales, dreamed ones stirring their young hearts. How could a name, a story, transform a soul? As the echoes of past struggles faded into the horizon, Eliza Monroe found herself standing beneath a sky that was no longer a barrier, but a boundless beginning. Her smile, radiant and unburdened, spoke of a quiet triumph. Whenever she mused on this truth, the townsfolk, once hushed with murmurs of her name, now welcomed her with warmth at the market stalls. The baker, with a knowing grin, tucked away an extra loaf just for her. Even the sheriff, his hat dipping a fraction lower in respect, softened his stoic demeanor, his laughter mingling with hers in a melody of newfound ease. At home, her husband's tenderness wove itself into the fabric of their days. Before supper, he'd press a gentle kiss to her hand. After her long hours, his hands would knead away the weight from her shoulders. Never once did he demand she erase her yesterdays. Instead, he carved out space for her to blossom beyond them. In the stillness of late afternoons, Eliza would retreat to her writing room, gazing over the rolling hills through an open window. The breeze, playful and insistent, would dance with her pages, urging her to write not only for herself, but for the trembling girl who once believed mere survival was her only dream. In the worn leather of her journal, a final line trembled with raw honesty. "When I knocked on the door of Three Pines Ranch, I thought I was bartering my very soul for refuge, but what I received was a true home and a man who saw my worth enough to build a room for my unwritten tomorrows." From a storm-lashed porch in Snow Ridge to a sun-drenched haven crafted for her stories, Eliza unearthed more than endurance. She discovered dignity, purpose, and a love that sought not perfection, but truth. In a land where winter's bite could claim you and shadows of the past could linger, she rose, not because she was rescued, but because she was truly seen. Isn't that, after all, the deepest yearning of the human heart, to be witnessed in our entirety? Oh, you captivating chronicles of love, healing, and unyielding strength, born from the wild, untamed spirit of the American frontier, where bullets flew wide, yet hearts found their mark. Can a single tale linger in your soul forever? Ring that bell to ensure you never miss one. Thank you, dear viewers, for joining us on this heartfelt journey. Your support means the world. Please leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe to our channel to keep these stories alive in our shared community.